The Importance of Education in Relation to Alaska Native People by Meryl Chu. Native Cultures of Alaska, April 23rd, 2015. I'd like to start this presentation by saying, as a disclaimer, that I am not an Alaska Native person, and I don't have specific first-hand knowledge of Alaska Native culture. This paper that I wrote is written from the point of view of someone who has great appreciation and desire to understand the Alaska Native cultures here where I live. However, I definitely don't claim to be an expert on anything, and I don't claim to have first-hand knowledge. So there may be things that are inaccurate or things that Alaska Native people would not agree with in my presentation and in my paper, and I just think that's important to acknowledge when we discuss issues specific to a certain culture or race or anything like that. The basis of my paper was written about sort of how education got taken from Alaska Native people, what those consequences have been because of that, and some ideas on how to make it better. So when we look at the history of Alaska Native people, it's really clear to see how education has been used as a tool of oppression since colonization. So, after colonization and after the first sort of influx of, white people from the Western world came, things changed really quickly, which we learned about a lot in this class. So something to think about is in these early stages of colonization is boarding schools where children were removed from their families, forced to speak different language, forced to eat foreign foods, often beaten, and just in these really terrible situations. So that's sort of where this all begins, this discussion of education and Alaska Native people and how that all plays in together and how important it is. A really interesting part of this period of time, I think, is this sort of Sheldon Jackson era, if you will, which Steve Langdon addressed in his book, The Native People of Alaska, Traditional Living in a Northern Land. And, Mr. Langdon wrote, one of the key elements in the American missionary plan was the eradication of native languages. Jackson's ideas and efforts established a powerful template in the minds of non-natives and many natives for how cultural change and development should proceed for Alaska Natives. And I really like that quote because it's pretty much the crux of this issue. It's that, foreign people came to Alaska where there was native people, a culture, an education system, all that already established, and, brought this idea of what was right and just have, since this era of colonization has carried forward this idea that the colonizers' view was right and they had come here to fix and save and change the native people. So basically what that's turned into for us now, carrying forward from that where we no longer have those what would seem really drastic, like the boarding schools, those really abusive and horrible situations, is we have historical trauma built up from that. It was not that long ago where boarding schools, assimilation, all these things were happening. It was grandparents and people that still carry this with them, and it's carried forward in a lot of different ways that people don't talk about as much anymore. But one thing that's become really clear is there's been there's higher rates of alcoholism, drug use, criminal activity, domestic violence, things like that among the Alaska Native population. But what we don't often look at is why that is, and those things like alcoholism are like a top layer surface issue to what's actually going on for people and for communities. And so I thought this was really interesting. In discussion, like a school board situation in a certain community, um, Jester wrote about a community where the school board and many of the community members were portraying Alaska Native community members in their area as, quote, unhealthy, and blamed that for the Native students' lack of what they deemed adequate test scores. So Jester wrote, Alaska Native parents were also portrayed as barriers to the children's achievement in school because they do not teach their children appropriate social and personal skills necessary for education success. I think this is another crux of this issue, is that the outsiders or the Western people, or however you want to refer to non-natives in this setting, are not looking at where these issues are really coming from. They're not looking at what stemmed from colonization. They're not looking at what stemmed from historical trauma, and it's these surface issues. So they're placing blame on parents, where it really should, we really should be looking for the solution. We should be looking for how to include these children, how to meet them where they are, to encourage them educationally to continue down a path that will be helpful for them, helpful for their communities. And that's what's really missing right now, basically. So when we look at the idea of a solution, or a kind of more of a where to go from here, I think we have to look at the dire importance of incorporating Native values and Native traditions into the Western school system, because still all children in Alaska, or at least most children in Alaska, are being taught in westernized school settings, whether or not they've grown up in villages, whether or not English is their first language. So, it's not as drastic as a boarding school, but it's still, it's still assimilation in its own way. So what's really important to look at here is how we can incorporate it, how we can make it a safe and comfortable place for all students. Because if children, young people, if they feel comfortable, if they feel at home there, if they feel like they're being met where they are and someone is helping them move forward, that's what's effective. And Western school systems can teach, sometimes for some students they'll be in a foreign language or a second language, but they're also teaching foreign thoughts, this fast-paced way of thinking, this white man's view of the world that, Alaska Native families, cultures, communities might not necessarily agree with, and it's still being just thrust upon them in this forceful manner. So some things to really think about incorporating are hands-on learning, different ways to learn for different students who are in different places. Giving students time to share and to storytell, which is very important in Alaska Native culture, as well as, respect for elders and learning from elders. And elders should be a part of the school system for Native children, as well as time to connect with nature, and just time to learn things that are traditionally useful, like hunting and fishing and food gathering, things like that are sort of ingrained in their DNA as a culture and are being lost because of this forced view, this forced Western system. And I think this quote is really, really helpful, and I just love the part where Anne Finup Riordan writes, campers arrived by plane wearing jeans and athletic shoes, not gutskin parkas and sealskin boots. Young people should learn and elders should teach. And what I think is, and it's, this modern means, and what I think is really interesting about that is that a lot of people have this misconception that in order to respect and hold up Alaska Native culture and traditions, we have to do this big backpedal. And in some ways that might be true, but also, it's about finding the balance. Things have changed, and there's a really, a modernized time, even in many villages. But, I just love that idea that you can wear jeans and still participate in traditional Native activities and be a part of your community and your culture. So I think that that's really important. And I think that the closing idea of my paper and my presentation was just the awareness of, of where Alaska Native students and people have come from, where their pain and trauma has come from. The awareness and understanding of that is absolutely crucial in order to provide quality education. And, the other absolutely most important thing is that, non-native people they have to stop telling Alaska Native people what the best thing is. It's not, it's not our place and it's not our time. And so I believe what is important is to follow the lead of the Alaska Native leaders in their community and, listen when they tell us what their children need and support that, because that's best for Alaska as a whole, that's best for our people, and that's best for our children.